Lila's heart pounded as she stumbled through the uneven dirt path, the tall grass whipping against her legs, soaking her nightdress with dew. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the fields that stretched beyond the town, yet the beauty of the night did nothing to calm the fear gnawing at her. She had known this moment might come, yet nothing could have prepared her for the sheer cruelty of it. For months, she had kept her love for Eli a secret, a flame she dared not show in public. But someone had seen, someone had always been watching. The town of Ashwood prided itself on its rigid codes, a place where conformity was law and love outside one's own kind was considered a sin punishable by shame, or worse. Lila had learned that early. Her parents had warned her, neighbors had whispered, and every glance from the sheriff had seemed to weigh her down. Yet, despite all the rules, she had loved. Eli, with his steady gaze, quiet strength, and gentle laugh, had captured her heart in a way that left her breathless. They had met by the old oak at the river's bend, where the world seemed to pause just for them. There, in the embrace of moonlight and rustling leaves, they had found freedom, a fleeting sanctuary from the judgmental eyes of Ashwood. Tonight, though, that sanctuary was gone. She could hear the angry shouts behind her, the unmistakable rhythm of boots pounding against the hard earth as the mob closed in. Panic flared in her chest. She turned, catching a glimpse of Eli running after her, his face pale and desperate. "Lila," he called, voice breaking with urgency. She wanted to scream back, to tell him to hide, to run, but fear and disbelief had frozen her legs. They reached the edge of the field, where the old wooden fence stood like a scar against the landscape. The mob was already there, brandishing torches that splintered the darkness, their faces twisted in anger and contempt. The leader, a burly man with a crooked scar down his cheek, grabbed her roughly, shoving her toward the fence. Lila's hands flew to the rough wood, but it was no use. They tied her arms with coarse rope, pulling it tight until her skin burned and red welts formed. Her feet struggled against the uneven ground, but the rope held firm. The crowd jeered, some throwing stones and taunts. "This is what happens to those who defy our ways." One man shouted, "Let her be a lesson." Another laughed cruelly, pointing at Eli, who had stopped a few paces away, his hands clenched into fists, knuckles white, unable to intervene. Lila's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of them. His despair mirrored her own. The sheriff arrived just then, his figure cutting a solemn path through the mob, but even his presence did little to comfort her. She had seen the fear and respect he inspired in the town before, but tonight, she feared even he might not be enough. Her mind raced. How could love, something so pure, be met with such hatred? Her thoughts turned to Eli once more, and tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She hated that he was in danger because of her, hated that their love could bring pain, but she also couldn't deny that every stolen smile, every hidden touch, had been worth it. As the mob pressed closer, she could feel the rough ropes digging into her wrists, each movement sending sharp pain up her arms. She tried to shout, to plead, but the words were swallowed by the noise, by the laughter and anger of people she had known all her life. The cold night air bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the coldness of their hearts. She had imagined punishment, perhaps exile or scolding, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw, public humiliation of being tied to that fence. Under the unforgiving moon, Eli's voice cracked as he called out again, urging her to hold on, promising silently that he wouldn't give up. Lila clenched her jaw, forcing herself to breathe through the terror, to focus on the one thing that kept her grounded, him. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined the river, the quiet oaks, the soft rustle of leaves that had always felt like home. And for a brief, fleeting second, that memory gave her strength. But the mob's taunts grew louder. Some tossed small stones, others spat at her feet. She could see the cruel satisfaction in their eyes, the way they delighted in her fear. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, to declare her love openly, but the fear was too strong, the ropes too tight, the situation too dire. Her only hope now was the sheriff, the man whose presence might be the only shield between her and the unforgiving rage of the townspeople. The sheriff's boots crunched against the dry grass as he moved toward the fence, each step deliberate, measured, and unwavering. His coat flapped lightly in the cold night breeze, the silver buttons catching the faint glow of the torches that the mob carried like angry fireflies. He had heard whispers of Lila and Eli, rumors that had spread through Ashwood like wildfire. But hearing about it and witnessing it were two different things entirely. Seeing a young woman tied to a fence, trembling and frightened, made the blood in his veins thrum with anger he rarely allowed himself to feel. He raised his hands, palms open, and called out in a voice that carried over the crowd. "Enough! Release her now!" The words were firm, heavy with authority, and for a moment, the mob faltered, the jeers losing their momentum. Some of them shot uneasy glances at each other, realizing that the sheriff's resolve was not a performance, it was the law he had sworn to uphold, and in this case, the law was on Lila's side. But the crowd's uncertainty was fleeting. A tall man with a jagged scar stepped forward, sneering. "Sheriff, you've got no right to interfere. She broke the rules, she's brought shame on all of us." His voice was venomous, each word laced with hate, as if the anger he felt toward Lila could protect him from the fear of being on the wrong side of justice. The mob murmured in agreement, some shaking fists, some stepping closer as if daring the sheriff to act. The sheriff's eyes never wavered from Lila, whose head drooped slightly as tears streaked down her face. Her hands were raw from the ropes, the rope fibers cutting into her wrists with every small movement. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, panic and pain blending into a sense of despair that threatened to overwhelm her. But the sheriff knew something that the mob did not: courage was contagious. And tonight, he would be the spark. With swift, practiced hands, he reached the fence. His knife flashed in the torchlight, slicing through the ropes with precise movements. The coarse strands fell away, and Lila sagged forward, supported only by the sheriff's steady arms. Relief washed over her in a rush, mingled with disbelief and fear. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but words were unnecessary. He met her eyes with a look that said, without speaking, "You're safe now, at least from them." The mob's reaction was immediate. Outrage roared through the crowd, and the air seemed to crackle with tension. "How dare you!" the scar-faced man shouted. "You'll pay for this, Sheriff. You'll regret siding with her." Others in the crowd echoed the threat, stepping closer, torches raised higher, shadows dancing across their faces, twisted in fury. For a moment, it seemed as if the night itself held its breath, waiting to see who would move first. But the sheriff stood his ground, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the leaders of the mob. He didn't raise his voice further, he didn't need to. His calm, unwavering stance spoke louder than any threat. He knew fear, he knew courage, and he knew that backing down now would only embolden the hatred that had almost destroyed Lila. He pressed a hand gently to her shoulder, steadying her, giving her the courage she had lost in the ropes and the crowd's jeers. Eli stepped forward then, finally breaking through the outer edges of the mob, his face pale but determined. He met Lila's gaze, his hands reaching for her, trembling but full of resolve. Relief and longing mingled in her eyes as she leaned into him for a moment, drawing strength from his presence. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Eli, then back to the crowd, a silent signal that he would not allow harm to come to either of them tonight. The mob shifted, uncertain now. The balance of power had shifted. What had begun as a display of collective rage was faltering in the face of singular authority and undeniable justice. Whispers started spreading, low at first, then louder, some voices questioning the cruelty of punishing love. Others remained steadfast in their hatred, but even they could feel the pull of morality against their fear. The sheriff straightened, his voice cutting through the murmurs, calm yet unyielding. "No one has the right to punish love. Not here, not tonight." His words rang with conviction, echoing through the fields, filling the space between the torches and shadows. Lila felt the weight of his courage wrap around her like a protective cloak. For the first time that night, she believed that they might survive this ordeal. Yet even as hope flickered, she knew that the night was far from over. Standing in the torchlight, supported by the sheriff and feeling Eli's hand in hers, she realized that courage always demanded a price. The sheriff had chosen to pay it on her behalf, but in a town fueled by fear and prejudice, that price was never cheap. Somewhere in the crowd, grudges were forming, and threats whispered in the dark promise that the confrontation was far from resolved. By the time the first stars glimmered high above Ashwood, the town had grown quieter, though the embers of anger and resentment still smoldered in hidden corners. The sheriff stood firm in the field, a silent sentinel, his coat dusted with dirt and sweat from the struggle, his eyes scanning the faces of those who dared challenge him. He had acted out of justice, out of principle, and now he faced the consequences. Some townspeople whispered their grudging admiration, hiding behind shutters and half-closed doors, while others plotted revenge in the shadows. Lila leaned on Eli, her body trembling from the night's terror and the cold, but her heart was steadier than it had been in months. She felt the warmth of his hand holding hers, grounding her, reminding her that love could survive even the harshest judgment. Together, they watched as the last of the mob lingered on the edge of the field, unsure whether to leave or press on. Their hatred had been confronted, their cruelty halted, at least for tonight, but the sheriff's actions had made one thing clear: fear could no longer dictate the law in Ashwood. The sheriff knew the road ahead would not be easy. Standing there, with the faint wind rustling the grass, he understood that his life had changed forever. Friends might turn into enemies, old loyalties could crumble, and whispers of revenge could escalate into something darker. He had sacrificed not just peace but security. Yet, as he looked at Lila, seeing the gratitude and fragile hope in her eyes, he realized that the choice was simple. Courage demanded a price, and he had paid it willingly. In the following days, the town was abuzz with talk of what had happened. Some praised the sheriff quietly, calling him a man of true justice in hushed tones, careful not to draw attention. Others stewed in resentment, plotting ways to undermine him, determined to restore what they saw as order. Lila and Eli found themselves the focus of gossip and ridicule, yet they also discovered pockets of support. Neighbors who had been silent before now whispered encouragement, emboldened by the sheriff's defiance. The act of one man had rippled outward, quietly changing hearts even among those who had clung to prejudice. Despite the support, the sheriff faced direct consequences. Threats arrived at his door, unsigned letters slipped under his office's threshold, warning him to reconsider his loyalties or face harm. One evening, as he walked the edge of the town, he caught sight of figures moving in the shadows, silent observers who seemed to weigh his every step. The sheriff's hand rested lightly on his gun, a reminder that courage alone was sometimes not enough. Still, he refused to back down, believing that justice and morality must outlast fear and hatred. Lila and Eli stayed close to him, drawing courage from the man who had risked everything for their love. They began to understand what it meant to live in a world where love was forbidden and fear ruled, yet they also realized the power of defiance. Every whispered word of thanks, every subtle gesture of support from the townspeople, became proof that change, however small, was possible. The sheriff's act had sparked something in Ashwood, a seed of rebellion against the cruelty that had governed it for generations. The confrontation that many feared eventually came. One night, the scar-faced man and his cohorts attempted to ambush the sheriff, their anger and vengeance boiling over. But he was ready, prepared not only with his weapon but with his resolve. The standoff was tense, the night air thick with anticipation, yet the sheriff did not falter. He spoke calmly, firmly, addressing not just the aggressors but the watching shadows of the town itself. His words cut through the darkness. "You can threaten me. You can try to intimidate me. But love is not a crime, and justice will not bend to fear." In the end, it was the sheriff's unyielding presence that held the balance. The ambushers retreated, their anger diminished in the face of courage and principle. Lila and Eli clung to one another, finally able to exhale, knowing that the sheriff had shielded them not only from immediate harm but from a legacy of fear. The town, though still divided, had witnessed the power of one person willing to act with integrity. Months later, Lila and Eli walked together along the riverbank, the old oak trees swaying gently in the breeze, a quiet reminder of what they had endured. The sheriff watched from a distance, his coat still dusted with dirt but his stance unwavering. He had paid a high price, risking his reputation, his safety, and perhaps even his life, but in doing so, he had protected love and inspired change. Lila squeezed Eli's hand, and he nodded, understanding the depth of sacrifice that had brought them here.